So occupational therapy, we call that OT, most of the time, is a healthcare profession that utilizes everyday activities or occupations to address physical, cognitive, psychosocial, sensory perceptual, and other aspects of task performance in order to improve functional independence and quality of life. So who knows how many bones are in the body? I want to guess. Anybody got a guess? Close? 206, right? Okay. So your bones, of course, make up your skeleton, which is your framework for your body, right? Your bones have areas that allow your muscles to attach to them so that you can move your bones, you can move your skeleton. So how many muscles are in the body? Who's got a good guess if you don't know? That's a good guess. You're actually pretty close. 640, give or take, depends on what you read, all right? But there's about 640 muscles in the body. So your muscles attach to your bones, and they allow your bones to move like levers, right? So you can move your arms, you can move your legs. But what do we need to make the muscles work? What's telling the muscles to make our bones move? Your brain, essentially, right? So your nerves, you got all these nerves running through your body. They send a signal down there to the muscle, make it contract, make the bones move. So how many nerves do you think we have in our body? When we talk about the nervous system, we're really talking about neurons, okay? So how many neurons? It's more than tens of thousands. It's way more than tens of thousands. Got any guesses? I don't know if that's more than how many? 100 billion. Okay, not quite a trillion, right? So that's a lot of neurons, right? And if you do the math, there's a lot that needs to go on here so that you can actually move around and function and talk and think, right? You have to have all these systems working together. Your nervous system, your muscles, your skeletal system needs to be intact, right? Okay. So I know you guys are still eating, but we're going to do a little activity because I want to give you an experience so that you can get a better sense for what we're going to talk about next, okay? So put your pizza down, and we're going to go to the back of the room here, all right? Okay, so here are the instructions. What you're going to do, starting with me, is you're going to take the koosh ball and you're going to toss it to somebody who's roughly across from you, okay? You ready? Okay. The wild shirt, what is your name? Kyle? All right, ready? Kyle. You toss it to somebody else and call their name. Your last one? Oh, wait.
I can't see your name, sorry.
Okay, has everybody had it? Okay, it comes back to me. I'm Julia. Oh, gotta catch the ball.
Nathan. Alyssa.
Kyle. 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 Oh no! Let's talk a little bit about everything that was going on there, all right? We were just talking about the nervous system and the bones and the muscles. So from a physical perspective, to play that game, right, just tossing the balls, what all was going into that? What kinds of physical skills did you need to actually engage in that activity?
Hand-eye coordination.
Hand-eye coordination, okay. Go ahead. Concentration, all right. So how about the balance? Keeping your balance during the whole thing, right? Okay. Having to swing your arm, get that arm moving. How many people had to pick the koosh balls up off the floor, bending down and reaching, right? Okay, so you're kind of moving around there. What about the cognitive or the thinking parts of that activity? Remembering your name, remembering your own name, right? Remembering the person's name you were throwing the ball to, right? What about paying attention to hearing your name? That was the only way I knew the ball was coming to me, is when I heard my name called out. Otherwise, there was just too much going on, right? So kind of that selective hearing. We call that more of a divided attention sort of task, right? How about the visual skills we needed? Okay, what were you seeing going on during that activity? You kind of probably were using a little bit of your direct vision because you had to watch the ball coming at you so you could catch it, right? And you had to watch the person you were throwing it to. But what about all the other balls flying in the air? Were you sort of seeing that activity happening kind of in your peripheral vision? You weren't really looking at it? How about the ball coming at you? You had to kind of quickly shift with your depth perception, right? You had to be scanning back and forth, kind of making sure you weren't going to get hit by the ball, right? From an auditory perspective, so you're hearing, again, what were you hearing going on in the task? You're kind of blocking out all the other names. You really were only concerned about hearing your name, primarily, right? So how about from a proprioceptive standpoint? Does anybody know what that means? Your proprioceptive system. So that's basically your body has the ability to tell where it is in space without using your eyes, right? So I can close my eyes and I can lift my arm up and I know my arm's up in the air, okay? And it also relates to feeling pressure. We have some pressure receptors, okay? So again, you were kind of concentrating on making sure you were catching your ball and throwing it to the next person. You weren't really paying attention to, did I have the ball? Your brain was picking up on the signal. It hit your hand. You knew you had the ball. I didn't have to look at it to see that I had the ball. Or you knew you missed it because there was nothing in your hand, right? So what about from a social perspective? What was going on? Was it fun? Everybody's laughing. It was funny, huh? Did you kind of get a little bit of adrenaline going when you realized you had all these balls thrown through the air, right? So all these systems were at play during this activity, and this was kind of a fun activity, just sort of a play activity. But all of these systems are controlled by your brain, your central nervous system, telling your body what to do in a split instant, right? So let's talk about some of the other basic activities that we have to do every day. We like to refer to these as activities of daily living, or ADLs, okay? So when we talk about things like self-care and home management, and you think about all of these other systems, your physical, your cognitive system, your hearing, your vision, what all goes into all these activities that you engage in from the time you get up in the morning, right? When we talk about what occupational therapists do, we're really talking about all those daily activities, using those daily occupations as a way of reteaching people how to regain function back after they've had an injury or an illness. If you have a spinal cord injury, your brain is not able to get the messages all the way down to your arms to move. So how are you going to get re-engaged in some of the basic activities? How are you going to get dressed in the morning? How are you going to get to school? How are you going to drive? Maybe you've had an accident and you've had broken a lot of bones and you actually can't walk because you're not allowed to put weight on your legs. How are you going to do some of these basic activities? How are you going to get to school so you can continue with your studies? Those kinds of things. So OTs provide training for recovery of physical and cognitive function. We teach compensatory strategies for performing tasks in a different manner than normal when we cannot restore function. So while we're working with our patients to regain the use of their muscles, to regain those tracks that they have in their brain to tell the muscles to fire, to be able to jump up and spike the volleyball, we might need to teach them other ways of doing things. We might need to give them some assistive technology, some adaptive equipment so that they can become more independent, okay? It's kind of a very broad spectrum. We do a little bit of everything. I want to share with you a little bit about some of the functional disabilities that we treat as occupational therapists, okay? So we see patients who've had brain injuries. Those might be traumatic brain injuries. We also see non-traumatic brain injuries, so people who develop things like brain tumors, just sort of out of the blue, or have aneurysms and they have to have some surgery. They have to have a craniotomy where, they go in and sort of get the tumor out of there, and it kind of leaves some damage to the brain. So either way, you've got some brain damage. And when we were talking before about the central nervous system, it all starts up in the brain, and it sends these messages down the spinal cords and out to the arms and legs so that you can function. If you've got a damaged area of your brain, those messages aren't being sent. So we've got to figure out a way to retrain those patients to become functional again. We have another population that we see a fair amount of, people who've had spinal cord injuries. A lot of things can injure the spinal cord. And when you sort of had an injury at the spinal cord, depending on the level, you may not be able to use your arms or legs. It just kind of depends. Sometimes there can be recovery from that. Sometimes there can't. And we have to teach patients how to do things in a different manner. We see a lot of patients who've had strokes. So does anybody know what the technical term for a stroke is? Okay, we refer to it as a CVA. So it's a cerebrovascular accident. It's an accident that happens with your vascular system in your brain, right? Tells you exactly what it is, okay? When we have an injury or we have a stroke on the right side of our brain, what does that usually affect? Does anybody know? I have a stroke on the right side of my brain, it actually affects the left side of my body for the most part, okay? We treat other neurological disorders like multiple sclerosis or something called Guillain-Barré syndrome. They affect the nervous system. We treat patients who've had multi-trauma, lots of orthopedic injuries. A lot of times patients who've been in car accidents, they end up with broken arms and broken legs. We see cardiac patients. We see patients who've had amputations, okay, so they've lost one or more limbs. A lot of times those folks end up with prosthetics. Sometimes they're not ready for them when they see us. So, if I've got somebody who's lost a leg and he's not healed well enough and ready for a prosthetic leg so that he can walk, I got to teach him a different way to walk, okay? It involves some adaptive equipment. It involves a different way of doing things so that he can get dressed or bathed or take a shower, right? I've had an experience in the past several years to see 2 different patients who have lost all 4 of their limbs, around the elbow and around the knee. And it's quite amazing to see what they're capable of when they have prosthetic limbs put on. It's really incredible. I never would have thought that someone could function well with some fake arms and legs after they healed. So we see patients with developmental disabilities, so kids, right, in pediatrics, if they have Down syndrome or they have cerebral palsy. And then, of course, in the older population, degenerative brain disorders, so things like Alzheimer's disease. You guys have probably heard about that, or dementia, okay? Working with a lot of cognitive issues with those patients, trying to teach them to be able to do some basic things for themselves. So it's kind of a broad spectrum. We get to see a lot of different diagnoses. It's pretty interesting. As far as the work settings that occupational therapists can be found in, hospitals, okay? I work in an inpatient rehab hospital. Transitional care, so older adults who maybe can't live at home anymore and they're in a skilled nursing facility. We see kids in the school systems, okay? Helping them to become successful, to be able to learn. Community programs like outpatient care. Vocational rehab, we do have some therapists who specialize in areas where they want to teach. They need to be able to teach their patients to get back to the job they were doing before. They may have to do it a slightly different way. In home health care, our therapists go into the home to work with patients. Travel assignments, this is one of the coolest things you can do as a therapist, okay? Because you've got needs all over the nation, and there are companies that hire therapists, and they'll place them for 13-week rotations all over the country. So if you want to travel, if you're out of school and you're not tied down with family or anything, hey, I want to go to Hawaii. We have an OT working with us right now. She's a traveler. She's helping out because we're kind of busy. And she just got finished spending 6 months in Hawaii. Home accessibility and universal design, we're finding these days, especially as the population ages, that there is a greater interest in being able to stay, for our older folks, being able to stay in their home. Academia and research kind of speaks for itself. So obviously we have a lot of institutions that need instructors, and the research goes without saying. And then, of course, policy development and administration draws back to things like healthcare and coverage of OT services under healthcare plans and things like that. So lots of different areas that occupational therapists work in. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I found my profession. So I grew up in San Diego. Has anybody been to San Diego? Southern California? Right? Okay. It's a pretty cool town. It's right on the ocean. I mainly grew up there. And, you know, in high school, I was a pretty good student. I was more A's than B's, right? I considered myself a good student. I was good in math. I really liked my art classes. I was really interested in some psychology classes. And my parents, neither of them had 4-year degrees. But from the time I can remember, they would tell us, I have 2 brothers, you guys are going to college, you're going to get a degree, you can major in whatever you want, but you're going to college. So I said, okay. So I applied to UCSD, University of California in San Diego, very academic school, okay? We're talking Division III athletics, so there are no sports scholarships here. It's all about academics. And I got in, and so I was good. I was like, okay, going to college, going to do this graphic design thing, so I'm going to be an EECS major. EECS major, that stands for Electrical Engineering and Computer Science. So I enter as an EECS major. And, I start on my little course. I lived on campus. Even though I was only 20 minutes from home, I lived on campus. It was great. I lived there for several years. So I start my first semester as an EECS major, and I have some general ed classes, and I have this basic programming class. And I'm in this programming class, and I'm having to go to the lab, and I'm having these assignments where I don't know if I have to go to the lab for 3 hours or 30 hours to get this done, because it wasn't clicking for me. I just didn't get the whole programming thing, and I was really frustrated, and I thought, I really hate this kind of thing. How am I going to go 4 years in college with these kinds of classes only to get a degree, to have a career, to do something that I really don't like? This is my first semester in college, and I thought, I can't do that. I got to change my major. But I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. But I knew I liked psychology because I'd taken some psychology classes in high school. And I was an 18, 19-year-old person, so I was interested in the social dynamics of people. So I thought, okay, I'm going to change my major to psychology, knowing full well it's a useless degree in and of itself, truly, a bachelor's degree in psych. Nothing you can do with it except go to graduate school. But that was my plan. Change my degree to psychology, something I enjoyed, and I'll figure it out later. Okay, so here we go. So my 4 years in undergrad school, I sort of plotted through because the classes, most of my classes were like 200 and 300 kids in a class. And you had a midterm and a final that made your grade, right? So if you bombed one, you were pretty much, there was no saving you, right? And the testing style, because of these big classes, were lots of multiple choice, lots of true false. I don't test that way. I'm an essay kind of person, short answer. So I was really frustrated because I didn't test well. I went from being a more A's than B's high school student to a more C's than B's college student with an occasional A thrown in there. And I couldn't figure out how to do well. I just wanted to finish, okay? So I get down to my last semester, and I have this psychology course, and I meet with the counselor just to make sure I'm on track to graduate, and she says, well, you're going to be like a credit and a half short of graduating. And I thought, I can't go another this is crazy. So I went to my psychology professor, and I said, I need a credit and a half. Can I work in your lab? Can we develop something? She's like, sure, come work in my autism lab. So these kids, they have a lot of difficulty assimilating environmental information and social skills. They're often very bright, but they don't really function really well in society. So this was her specialty. She had this autism lab. And she used behavior modification techniques, okay, so a lot of positive reinforcement to sort of shape these kids' behavior so that they could function better in society. And she needed kind of a lab rat, so that was me. So I earned my credit and a half being her lab rat and being her test person with these kids. And it was fun. I actually learned a lot, and I was really fascinated by the whole concept of behavior modification. So when I graduated, when I graduated, I got a job. And I got a job at a residential brain injury program. I found this place outside of San Diego in the foothills for adults who'd had brain injuries who were still struggling to be able to return back to normal life because their brains were not back to normal, right? They had healed physically from their injuries, but they still were not able to organize their days. They were not able to behave appropriately when they had frustrating situations. They were not able to return to work. So we worked with these patients to teach them ways to assimilate back into their normal lives. This is where we had 3 different therapists on staff. We had an occupational therapist, a physical therapist, and a speech-language pathologist as part of this program. And this was my first exposure to any of those therapy disciplines. I had never really considered that there were these different therapies out there. So working with them, I quickly realized that occupational therapy was a really good fit for me because there's a strong basis in psychology, in OT, and I really liked the teaching and the problem solving that went into the profession. So I thought, okay, now I got a plan. Now I know what I want to study. Now I know what I want to go to graduate school for. So I started researching. I thought, how hard can it be to get into graduate school for OT, right? I started researching some schools in California because, if I stay in state, it's less expensive. And there were 3 schools that offered master's programs in California. 2 of them were expensive, so I applied to San Jose State University, in-state school. I thought, how hard can it be? Well, the problem was, because I struggled at undergrad school, I only had a 2.7 GPA, which was dismal in my mind, of course. Unfortunately, all of these graduate schools were looking for a 3.0 GPA. And so when I applied to San Jose State, and they basically turned me down right away, they said, well, we didn't even look at your application because you don't have the magic 3.0. I was like, oh my gosh, this is a huge roadblock. What am I going to do with this? I can't change my GPA, right? I finally found out what I want to do, and now I have this GPA weighting me down, and what am I going to do with this? So I sort of regrouped a little bit, and I thought, I got to come up with a plan. I got to figure out how to get to graduate school to study what I want to do. So one of the things I did is I actually changed my job, and I went to work for an organization in a skilled nursing facility where I could work very closely with the therapists. I actually worked very closely with the PT and the OT there, and it got a lot of hands-on experience. The other thing that I did is I researched all of my other options. Okay, I needed to find a school that maybe wasn't going to weight the GPA so much. At the time, there were 16 master's programs in the nation. That was it. So I looked at all of them on the list. And then I also looked at the prerequisite courses that were required to be able to get into graduate school. Okay, other than taking the GRE, the graduate entrance exam, I needed to pick up a few prereq courses. So I picked up, at a community college in town, I picked up anatomy and physiology. I moved on through these classes. I got A's in both of those classes, of course. I applied to my schools. I applied to a school in Colorado. I applied to a school in North Carolina. And I applied to a school in Virginia. And I got into the school in Virginia, partly because I did an interview on site, and I basically made them take me. Partly because I had a really good base of hands-on experience working with patients. I was the only one in my class who had paid experience working with patients in the discipline that I was applying for. And so here I was, taking a cross-country trip from Southern California to Virginia. Virginia is part of the South, right? There's a whole different history over there in the South on the East Coast. It was all new to me. It was kind of a cultural shock. So it took me about 6 months just to get my head around the place because I'd never spent any time in the South. My graduate program was a 2-year program, 2 years straight, summers included, right? I had to do a master's research project. We didn't have to do a thesis, but we had to do research, so that was a pretty big deal. The first year that I was in Richmond, I thought, this is different. This is an interesting place. It's really green, but I think I'm headed back west when I'm done with school. It's not for me. I'm headed back west. My second year in school, it kind of grew on me a little bit, and I thought, California is so expensive. I'm not going to go back to the West Coast, but I want to get to the coast. I want to get back to the beach. So I had all these grand plans when I graduated to go down to the beaches of North Carolina. Lots of cool beaches down there. And then I met my husband-to-be, and his business, of course, was in Richmond. So my little 2-year plan turned into about 15 years that I stayed in Virginia. So after I graduated, I got my master's degree in occupational therapy. I got a job right there on campus because we had this great teaching hospital at the Medical College of Virginia. And I thought, I want to put myself in a place where I can keep learning. I'm just going to start learning now that I've graduated, right? And it was awesome. It was inpatient rehab setting. So I was working with a lot of different people who were learning. I was working with resident physicians who were learning. I was working with a lot of other therapists who were new to the profession. So it was really ideal for me. I had some offers to work in different settings where I had to be more independent, but I knew that wasn't going to be a good choice because I needed more mentorship. So I started there in the inpatient rehab setting. And I worked there for a couple of years. And then I moved on to post-acute rehabilitation. So I actually worked in the skilled nursing setting. I worked with the older adult population. And part of the reason I decided to make that move was because the pay was so much different. It was so much higher, okay? I also wanted to make sure that I sort of broadened my skills. And I actually worked in the skilled nursing setting for quite a few years in a lot of different roles. I sort of wandered into the management direction of a facility and then into multiple facility management positions. And that was really different from working with patients. I learned a lot. And then we moved to West Virginia. Well, we didn't move to West Virginia. We moved to Southwest Virginia. I worked in West Virginia, right on the border there. And I felt like, I want to get my hands really working on patients again. So I actually made my way back to inpatient rehabilitation because I really liked the setting. I liked working with these adults who were coming from acute care and changing so quickly and learning their skills again so quickly and being able to get them home, right? So about 8 years ago, we moved out here. One of the great things about my job is I've always been mobile. Anytime we have moved, it's never been about could I get a job. I've always been able to get a job because there's a huge demand for occupational therapists in different settings. So when we came out here, I took a position with Renown, again in the inpatient rehab setting. And I actually was a manager in the department for a few years, but then I've been able to kind of climb my way back down the ladder again, back to patient care, which is really where I like to be, working with the patients. And now I'm actually a lead therapist, so I get to sort of do a hybrid of those things. I get to mentor the therapists coming in and also work with patients, so it's kind of the best of both worlds. So it's really kind of offered me a lot of different settings to work in. I've never worked in pediatrics, but I've always known that if I wanted to just drop everything and go work in the school system, I could do it because I have that degree. So it's nice to know that those options are out there. So I'm going to kind of go back to our little subtopic here of neurorehabilitation, and we're going to do a little activity here in a few minutes. When I was in graduate school, I had to do this research project. My class partner, and I decided since we were going to all of the trouble and time and effort to do research, we might as well get it published, right? So we got published. It was called a pilot project for group cognitive retraining with elderly stroke patients. So kind of in a nutshell, we were working with these gentlemen who'd had a stroke, and we were trying some different techniques with them with repetition of tasks and trying to teach them to become more independent with some of their basic skills, like getting dressed. And it was a really fun sort of research project that we did, but it sort of started my interest in the general direction of neurorehabilitation and really liking to work with that type of population. So when we talk about the population, the patients who've got neurological deficits, so they've had a head injury, we were talking about this before, they've had a head injury, they've had a stroke, okay? Their brains are not sending those signals to the other parts of their body to tell them what to do. We can talk about this concept of neuroplasticity. The word is derived from two root words, neuron, which of course we talked about before, relates to the brain, and then plastic, which means to sculpt or mold or modify, okay? So when we talk about neuroplasticity, we talk about it referring to the potential the brain has to reorganize by creating new neural pathways to adapt as it needs when one area has been damaged, all right? So the way I like to describe this to my patients, because education with my patients is a huge part of what we do. You know, they don't generally have medical backgrounds, so they don't really understand what a stroke is. So we are educating them all the time. Is I like to compare it to an analogy with sledding down a hill, okay? So I'm sure some of you guys have been sledding before, right? You live in northern Nevada. So what happens? You go out to the fresh snow, nobody's touched it, right? And you head that sled down the snow the first time, and you get this run that's probably, it might be a little wiggly because, you know, you don't really have a track to run in. So you go up the hill and you do the same run down the same track, right? And every time you do that exact same run down that track, what happens to the track in the snow? You're going faster because it's more defined. It's not all wiggly and wild, right? Okay, so when your brain is trying to make a new connection, a new part of the brain is trying to take over to serve the function that the damaged part of the brain was serving, that's kind of like running your sled down that same track every time, right? The more you do it, the more you do the same movement over and over again, the more you can retrain your brain to kind of take over that function of that arm or that leg, right? Have you guys heard of the term, the phrase, practice makes perfect? You've all heard of that, right? Okay. Do you think that's true? So practice doesn't really make perfect. Practice makes permanent, right? The more I do that movement, that repetition, I'm going to make a permanent, my brain is going to recognize that as a permanent movement pattern, okay? And then I don't have to think about it so much, all right? So that's just kind of the general gist of neuroplasticity. That's what our brains are capable of kind of reorganizing and being able to send some signals back down and kind of get the body moving again, right? It's pretty amazing. We're going to just kind of focus on one of the interventions that we use as occupational therapists. This is definitely not everything we do. It's just a very particular area. One of the things that we can do, aside from the repetition and teaching patients movement patterns to regain their function, is we can use other interventions like functional electrical stimulation, or it's also referred to as neuromuscular electrical stimulation, okay? So what we do with electrical stimulation, it's basically a transcutaneous application of electrical currents to cause muscles to contract. So transcutaneous, through the skin, trans is through, cutaneous is skin. There's lots of Latin that you learn when you take anatomy. It's really pretty interesting. Anyway, so we put some electrodes on the skin, and since the brain is not, if we have an injury in the brain and it's not sending that signal down to my arm, I can actually put the signal straight to the arm by putting these electrodes on my arm and sending the signal straight to the arm, right? So this is one of the interventions that we can use to work with patients to help retrain their muscles to function, all right? The goal is, of course, to promote voluntary control of the muscles so that we can actually do the activities we want to do and to keep them from becoming atrophied, to keep that muscle bulk, right? A couple of historical fun facts before we actually try this out. In 48 AD, long time ago, there was a Roman physician named Scribonius Largus, and he used torpedo fish to cure headaches and gout with people. And basically, torpedo fish are electric rays. And these electric rays, they don't have very good vision. But they do have these other organs. They have these electrical organs on the sides of their heads, and they would use these as sensory organs to be able to know what was going on in the world around them. So I don't know what he did. I don't know if he just kind of slapped these fish on their head or not, but he found that he could cure headaches by using the electrical current coming from these fish. Pretty interesting. But basically in 1791, Luigi Galvani, an Italian, he really came up with the first evidence that we could use a current to activate muscle movement. He basically used the static electricity from lightning that would be caught up in the copper drain spouts and railings, and he ran some wires to frog legs and he could make them jump. Okay, that was really the first big evidence that we could actually use this type of current to activate muscle function. And then, of course, in the 1960s, the Soviet scientists found that when they utilized electrical stimulation in conjunction with their athletic training, they could actually increase the strength by 40%, which is huge, of course. So there was some early research that showed the benefits of these kinds of interventions. What we're going to do now is we're going to do a little activity. I'm going to let you guys try out the electrical stim. If you don't want to try it, you don't have to, okay? But it's kind of interesting stuff. We have a table set up over here, okay? And I'm going to have you guys just kind of come up. We're going to have 2 people at the table at once, and kind of real quickly, again, if you don't want to try it, you don't have to. It's no big deal. It's not really painful. It's kind of irritating. It's an irritating sensation. But what we're going to do is we're just going to use a couple of electrodes, put them on the back of your arm, and just let you see what it feels like. You're going to feel your muscles contract without even trying. And you'll kind of get a sense for some of these interventions that we use with our patients who are trying to retrain their brains, right? There we go. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to keep moving it up, all right? What we're hoping to see is your muscle contract and your hand move. But if it gets too strong, you tell me. We're getting you ready too. Get your thumb up.
Feels like when your foot falls asleep.
Yep. Okay, here it comes again. It's just going to cycle. There you go. Pretty cool, huh? Oh, there you go. We got a pointer finger. Yeah, I'm trying to get your muscles to go. There we go. It's just going to cycle on and off, so here comes again. I know, it's like the claw hand, right? And everybody's a little bit different, so the electrode placement's always just different depending on how you're built. All right. So the middle finger lags because it's the longest finger. What do you think? Kind of weird, right? So did you guys get a sense for, kind of that, I mean, you definitely feels like electricity, right? I mean, it's pretty weird. But a lot of times that's kind of that intensity that helps our brains sort of wake up and say, what is going on down there? I got to check it out. I got to start sending some signals back down so we can get another connection. So it's really a cool piece of technology. We have these units. If there's time at the end and anybody wants to try it, I'll try it out on you. But basically, this is another electrical stimulation unit, and I'll pass it around. It's basically multiple electrodes built into a device that allows us to put it on the hand, okay? No. And then we can activate it, and we can open the hand, we can close the hand, we can do some pinching, okay? It's kind of a cool unit. It's the same technology, but I just wanted to show you guys what it looks like because this is a little more advanced. And if we have time at the end and anybody wants to try it, we'll fire it up, okay? It's pretty cool. This is called the BioNest unit. It's a company called BioNest that's developed this with a number of other products. They're actually working on a product that is an implantable biome where they literally take the electricity that comes from that little unit there, they put it in a tiny little capsule, and they're going to implant it in the motor point in your arm and then give you some, some way to control it so that you can actually control that muscle with an implanted. It's really cool stuff. It's, you know, it's not out yet, but it's getting there. So if you guys want to look at that, I'll pass it around. I have a couple of videos too that I want to show you because we have some other technology at the facility that's just too big to bring here. The first, these run for a couple of minutes. So the first one is what we call the RT300. It's basically the same technology. It's electrical stimulation. It's set up in an arm bike, and it also allows you to use it as a leg bike, okay? It allows us to put a whole bunch of electrodes on an arm. If we have somebody who can't use their arm at all because they've had a head injury or a spinal cord injury, we can get electrodes all over their arm, their shoulder, their lower arm, and it will coordinate the timing of firing the electrical impulses so that they can actually pedal a bicycle, okay?
This RT300 can be used as an FES arm cycle with the patient seated in their wheelchair, on another challenging surface, or while standing. The RT300's height can be easily adjusted, as can the arm pedal crank radius, so that the rider can be ergonomically positioned with optimal range of motion. These hand grips can be easily swapped out for forearm rests, which provide additional support, as well as a horizontal or vertical hand grip position. These restraints hold the wheelchair or other cycling surface securely in place during a therapy session. RT300 is controlled by our Sage controller, which has an antimicrobial touchscreen and engaging therapy animation. Sage lets you run arm therapy sessions with fully integrated functional electrical stimulation, FES. FES can be applied over up to 12 muscle groups, including any of the major muscle groups in the arms, shoulders, or trunk, as appropriate for the patient's presentation. FES can be delivered continuously to stabilize joints prior to crank rotation, for example, to ensure shoulder safety. The Sage controller can be easily removed, allowing use of the RT300's FES system standalone to facilitate functional activities with a patient. The RT300 is a versatile therapy system which you can use in your clinic with a wide range of patient indications or in your home, providing a continuum of care for ongoing rehabilitation.
So we've got a unit like that at the hospital. We use it a lot. I had a patient on it today. It's pretty cool because usually when the patients finish on the stimulation, they say that their arm just feels lighter. It doesn't feel so heavy and dead, you know, because the muscles have been stimulated and they've got that activity going. And I've seen patients improve after just a few sessions. They're able to actually have a little more volitional movement, able to move their arm the way they want to move it, okay? So we can use that for the legs. We have a lot of patients who use it for their legs. And we can use, several of you guys asked if we can use the electrodes on different parts of the body, and pretty much almost everywhere, not everywhere, but anywhere you've got a muscle that you can hit the motor point to activate that muscle, we can use the electrodes on there. So I'm going to show you another video, and this is not electrical stim. This is actually robotics. This is going to be an item that we actually will be getting at the facility. We don't have it yet. But it's another intervention that we have that we use with some of our patients as a way to teach them, to retrain them, to teach them the right movement patterns, okay?
PATE Rehabilitation has joined the top recognized rehabilitation centers in the United States to acquire the Armijo Spring for helping patients who have difficulty moving their arms. PATE Rehabilitation and UT Southwestern Medical Center are currently the only two places in Dallas to use the Armijo Spring for clinical rehabilitation purposes. The Armijo Spring is based on an ergonomic arm exoskeleton with integrated springs for arm weight support. It embraces the entire arm to reduce or eliminate the effects of gravity, so that the patient can produce greater movements than would be possible using traditional methods. The Armijo Spring can be used to train people for real-world activities like eating and drinking, and it also involves virtual reality training to help the affected arm's ability to function better in that real world. Instant computerized feedback on performance is provided, which is key to skill acquisition and refinement. In addition to its treatment benefits, Armijo Spring has assessment components that document objective progress over time. Used in conjunction with other therapies, the Armijo Spring can help the brain restore its ability to direct arm-hand functions. In the rehab world, this is called neuroplasticity. Patients at PATE who use the Armijo Spring report that they like using the system and want to continue. They're interested to discover what motions they're capable of and how to maximize any return of movement that is seen. Being able to perform such actions as cracking an egg, picking fruit from a grocery aisle, and cleaning a window serve as realistic tasks the patient is challenged to perform using only the affected limb in a gravity-reduced plane. The Armijo Spring allows the therapist to modify the difficulty level as their patient's skill level improves and objectively track these changes during the course of therapeutic intervention. As clinicians, we're ecstatic to have this type of device at our facility. It opens up possibilities for those patients who have the potential for return of movement. The research and evidence behind this type of technology and its application to neurorehabilitation is exciting and of utmost benefit to the patients we serve.
So they've actually got several different levels of this device. There's one that is completely robotic that just moves the arm in any movement pattern that you want to program in. So somebody who doesn't have any movement at all, it's going to take them through these movement patterns to help them relearn some movements that are functional. This one, the Armijo Spring, is a device that actually kind of off-weights the arm a little bit so that it's easier for them to use what little movements they actually have, and then to make them goal-directed. So you kind of saw that they had a lot of different video screens where they could reach for the fruit or they could drive the car or whatever. It kind of made it engaging. So we actually have, they refer to this as an exoskeleton, right? It's kind of what it is. We have an exoskeleton at the rehab hospital. It's not the upper extremity exoskeleton. It's actually a lower extremity exoskeleton. I call it the transformer suit because that's what it looks like to me. It literally straps onto the patient and it runs down their legs, and we can take somebody who's had a spinal cord injury who has no leg function at all, and they get a kind of a walker to support themselves on, and we can program that suit to walk for them. It doesn't really walk for them. It kind of allows them to take a step when they do their weight shifting correctly. It forces them to do certain movement patterns in order to get the next result, okay? And, you know, if you kind of think about the possibilities of, you know, we've got this electrical stimulation intervention and then technology, and then we've got these robotic exosuits. And if you kind of put the two together, I mean, you could really come up with a serious transformer suit, right? I mean, you just thought it was in the movies, but, you know, the possibilities are out there. If you guys think you want to check out OT or you want to learn a little bit more about it, here's some information about what kind of an education you need, okay? So it's a master's level degree. You can no longer get a bachelor's degree in occupational therapy. During your education, part of your required education are 2 12-week field work rotations. So basically you spend 2 rotations of 3 months working at a location, in a hospital, in a school system, whatever your site is that you've chosen, and you get to do on-the-job training, basically, and it's part of your education. You have to pass a national certification exam, take a test, right? And you have to also apply for state licensure. So any state that I work in, I have to get a specific license for that state. And then you also have optional specialty practice areas. So if I want to be a certified hand therapist, that requires a whole separate exam, a whole area of study, because it's a very specific focus on hand therapy. So I just wanted to share with you guys a little bit about what I like most about my profession. Actually, one of the things I like the most is the people I meet. The focus on quality of life. So again, medical technology in general continues to advance to the extent that we are keeping people alive who've had these really high-level spinal cord injuries. But what's the point if there's no quality of life? We need to be able to have some way for them to become functional and have a quality of life. So, I like that aspect of what I do, being able to improve their lives. And sometimes it doesn't take a whole lot. Sometimes it's just little things. So that's pretty cool. So another thing I really like about my job, and this was not something I knew going into this profession, I really didn't, but over the course of my career, which is over 20 years, I have always felt very secure in my job. I have always been able to find a job if I needed to find a job. The median pay right now is $80,000, which is looking pretty good if you've just coming out of graduate school, right? So it's pretty awesome. The practice environment options, you can work in any kind of setting, and that was a huge draw when I first started as an OT, because I thought, you know what, if I work in the hospital for a while and I get a little bit tired of that and I just need something different, I can go work in the school system and have something different, and I don't have to go back to school. Technology, again, it's pretty cool to be able to continue to learn about the technology and use this on patients and see that it benefits them. And then, of course, I get to do projects like this, which I just think are fun because I think it's a huge benefit to our community to be able to share what we do and kind of expose you guys to some different professions. I know you guys are kind of in a position where you have to make decisions at some point, right? So think about it. Don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive. And do that, because what the world needs are people who come alive. That's really what you want to do. And it might take you a little while in college to figure it out, but you'll figure it out. Thanks, guys. I hope you enjoyed it.